So, my man and I shared an apartment for a while, and it seemed pretty normal. After a while, things became hectic in the relationship, and I moved out, and we were broken up for about 9 months or so before I moved back in and worked things out. During my time away, he told me he had 2 friends of his move in and stay temporarily. Cool. Here is where it gets weird. Once I moved back in, the comfort in the apartment wasn't the same. I felt like I was being watched. Walking past the bathroom was highly uncomfortable, and I swore I would see shadows dancing in the hall while I sat in the living room. I would shut the bedroom doors to both bedrooms, thinking that maybe it was the light from outside reflecting the shadows of the trees into the hall. But no, sir. It continued. I brushed it off for a while and thought my imagination had gotten the best of me. Until one night. We were in our bedroom, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I looked over his shoulder, and in the hall, I saw a pitch-black shadow of a child run from the front of the apartment into the bedroom down the hall. I shot up and went to the bedroom, and what do you know? No one there. I told him about it, and he simply said it was my imagination. He doesn't believe of things in the paranormal nature. A few days later, his daughter was dropped off. She played in the other bedroom. She got quiet and then came into the living room where we sat and proceeded to ask him, "Daddy, whose baby was that in the hallway?" At this point, I was kind of happy but confused. Happy because I wasn't the only one. Confused because I saw a child, not a baby. Yet, once again, he ignored it and said it was just us. But then, we often sat together in the living room, watching movies. One day we heard noises, and I told him there was something wrong. Something was in the apartment. And to my satisfaction, he experienced it. He saw a man, also a dark shadow, just like the baby and child. The door to his daughter's room opened, and then it closed. She was not there this time. She was with her mother. The door handle jiggled until he got to the door, and then it stopped. This shadow would peek around corners, stand in the hall and watch us, and just frightened the hell out of me. He apologized for not believing, and he was a lifelong skeptic that had been proven wrong. He told his friend that he had lived there for some time before I moved back. His friend casually said, "Oh, things like that follow me around and have since childhood. I guess I left one behind." I became angry. I think some things should be shared with someone when you move into their home, you know? I snore, I sleepwalk. Casper is my first cousin and we're pretty close. Those kinds of things. We moved, but I'm still confused. Like, was it a baby, child, or a man? Did it appear to us in different forms? Was it actually 3 and not 1? But in our new place, we get the feeling we haven't moved here alone. So is it now attached to us? I still have so many questions. Hey everyone. About 2 weeks ago, I had a really scary experience, and my husband doesn't believe me. But last night, he had a very similar experience, and now we're both wondering what we could have possibly seen. Our puppy was barking to go outside to use the bathroom. It was about 4 or 5 in the morning. I took him out back and stood on the steps of our deck because I didn't want to get my feet wet. My dog was using the bathroom when I looked up and saw something across the yard. It was slowly walking toward me, like 1 step at a time, and its eyes were super reflective of my phone's flashlight. I thought it was a deer, but its eyes were so tall and staring straight at me. It wasn't running away, but walking closer. I hurried the dog up, and we ran inside. I have reoccurring night terrors, so at first, my husband thought it was just that. But I was crying and shaking and could barely talk about it. He told me it was probably a deer, but I just wasn't convinced. I refused to take the dog out after midnight, though. Early this morning, about 5 in the morning, the dog was barking and he took him outside. Once again, my husband stood on the deck stairs. He didn't have his glasses, but he said when he looked up, he saw something tall standing in the forest part of our backyard. He said he saw it walking slowly, like it was almost gliding. He said as soon as he noticed it, he got a nosebleed. My husband is typically prone to nosebleeds, but hasn't had one since the season has changed. He said he wanted to get a closer look, but felt like he needed to go inside instead, like instinctually. So he ran in. My husband also happens to be a zookeeper, and he isn't really afraid of animals. He works with giraffes and elephants, and says this creature was definitely bigger than any deer. We've been trying to search what else it could be, but are coming up with nothing. Any ideas? Oh, and for reference, we live in eastern Pennsylvania. If you need to be more specific or take a picture of my yard for reference, just let me know. This happened 3 years ago, during mid-July. I lived in Montana, outside of a rural community with a population of about 2,000. During this time, I lived in a small one-floor ranch home by myself. My nearest neighbor lived 1 mile away and was a farmer. I never had many strange encounters leading up to this one, but the woods by my house had always an ominous feel to them. Soon after moving in, I realized why the previous homeowners left pretty quickly. I'd start to hear noises in the woods. These weren't just any noises, but what sounded like blood-curdling screams and growls. After doing some research, I learned that even something like a raccoon or bobcat can make these unnatural noises, and chalked it up to being that. But still, it just never felt right, you know? It's hard to explain. But I never felt like this before, and it was just something about the woods around my house that made me uncomfortable. Like I was always being watched. The first experience, I couldn't explain what happened, but it happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. There was a thunderstorm, and the thunder was loud enough to keep me awake. The lightning was crazy and would light up the whole surrounding area for just a fraction of a second. I was lying on the couch and got up to get a glass and drink at the sink. It was about 2 a.m. if I recall correctly. Above it, there's a small window that gives a view of my yard leading up to the tree line. When the next flash of lightning hit, I saw it. Admittedly, it wasn't a long view, but it gave me enough time to see whatever this thing was. It was near the tree line, just a few steps into my yard. First thought was that it was a bear, but it wasn't. It was standing on 2 legs with its face pointed towards the house. Its legs were haunched like a dog's, and I could clearly make out the hocks. It was hard to tell the color of the fur, but it was dark. Its upper body was massive, with a wide torso, and arms that could almost reach the ground from standing. The strangest thing is how the upper body seemed to dwarf the lower body. After standing there, frozen in shock, I waited for the next lightning strike. But when it happened, it wasn't there. It happened so quickly and was gone so quickly. After that, I bought a gun and would sleep with it within arm's reach. The next encounter is what I consider the most frightening thing of my life. For several weeks, nothing worth noting happened. I don't get cable where I live, and one night I was watching something and my satellite kept acting up. I didn't like going outside at night, but this would be quick. I just had to move the antenna a little bit. Nothing had happened for a few weeks, so I decided to just go out and do it. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and went out. The first thing I noticed was the eerie quietness that surrounded me. This time of year at night, the woods are active with all types of creatures. Not tonight though. Despite the fear I was developing, I made my way over to the satellite and began to adjust it. I heard a small snap of a stick and quickly turned to my left and shined the light towards the direction of the noise. What I saw will horrify me for the rest of my life. I was immediately met with red eyes. These eyes were color of blood, and they were evil. The head of this thing looked like a mutated German Shepherd. I don't like to say it, but it looked like a werewolf. A long snout and pointed ears. The fur was black and shaggy in some places. I could see this creature's extremely developed muscles, and it dwarfed even the biggest humans on Earth. It was half in and half out of the woods, almost crouching, and it still came up to my head at 6 feet. Fully standing, this thing would have been 8 feet, I estimated. I was about 20 feet from this thing. I didn't even consider my gun, which I thought to protect me. Chances are, in hindsight, the little .223 bullets would have just pissed this thing off before it tore me to shreds. I backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact with it. I gently picked up my gun, and my fight or flight reflexes kicked in. I chose flight. Maybe not the best option, but even if I stayed there, this thing would have killed me. I ran the fastest I have ever in my life and didn't turn back once. I have no idea if it was pursuing me. I got in the house though, and I locked every door, window, and covered the blinds and sat with my back against the wall, cradling the gun the entire night. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night, and very few the following days to come. To make a long story short, I don't live there anymore. People often talk about Sasquatch being harmonious with nature and living within the ecosystem. Sure, if you see one, it might seem scary, but it's probably more awe than anything. With this thing, though, it was totally different. It felt unnatural. It was sinister. It felt evil. It was stalking me, toying with me, and I believe it would have killed me given the chance. I have never seen nor experienced this feeling again in my life. It's a memory I try to put past me, but I still get nightmares about it. I think until the day I die, I will always have the image burned deep into my memory. The best image I have seen that fits the description of the creature are the werewolves from the movie The Howling. My uncle lives in West Virginia, one of the more remote states in the eastern United States. While his main house is in town, he also has a small cabin up on Spruce Knob where he and my aunt would go during the summer. This cabin is very remote and accessed only by jeep trails and is not connected to an electrical grid. So, my aunt and uncle decided to take advantage of a 3-day weekend sometime in the late 80s and headed out to the cabin for some fly fishing and relaxation in the woods. When they arrived, my aunt went out to sketch some, while my uncle unpacked and built a fire in the fireplace, as it was already getting dark. As night began to fall, my uncle noted how unusually quiet the woods were. He has been camping, canoeing, and backpacking all over the world, and he still says that this is the quietest he has even ever heard them. He and my aunt packed everything up and went to bed late, sometime around midnight. My uncle awoke to a strange thumping and scratching noise coming from outside. He thought it was probably a bear or coyotes trying to get at a dog, and he grabbed his gun to go deal with it. As he pulled the gun out from its case, the door on the outside swung open, and a large hairy shape, vaguely humanoid shape, appeared, silhouetted in the moonlight. He said he never quite got a good look at it, but the one thing he really remembers is the overpowering smell, a stench of decay, and 2 glowing yellow eyes. He quickly emptied the gun, and while he didn't get a kill shot, he did scratch the beast's arm, which caused it to run squealing into the woods. He and my aunt immediately grabbed their things, got in their Bronco, and hightailed it out of there. Whatever my uncle saw never really bothered them again, and when he returned in the morning, with more people and firepower, he found very little evidence of any intrusion, except for a single strange clawed footprint in front of the cabin, and claw marks on the door. I don't really know whether to believe my uncle or not, as he is known for telling tall tales. However, unlike his other stories, he was completely serious when he told this one, and my aunt even backed him up. This story has always deeply disturbed me, as I too spend a lot of time in the woods. I will be making a trip up to their cabin this summer, so maybe, just maybe, I will see this same strange beast. I live in Washington, and Bigfoot stories are common. Today, my elderly coworker overheard my other coworker and I talking about Bigfoot encounters, and she began to tell us about hers, or at least she thinks it might have been a Bigfoot. Now, I am close to my coworkers, and we tell each other everything about our personal lives, and I have no reason to not believe her. She said she was camping with her husband when she saw a creature across the river from them. She said she also had her dog with her, and it was upset and growling, which was apparently uncommon for this dog. The way she described this creature was that it was about 7 feet tall with scraggly fur all the way down its body. She then went to the trailer to grab their shotgun when her husband also noticed the same creature. They then watched it as it ran through a clearing and disappeared. The thing she said that spooked me a little bit is when she said, "It could have been watching us for days. I don't know, but the dog knew." I was thinking it was a normal Bigfoot story until she described it as scraggly. Could it have been something other than a Bigfoot? Or maybe a Dogman? What do you think? So, timeline. This was around 2015. Not quite sure the month, but it was around 11 at night. I was driving from my dad's place to my mom's. I've said this a couple of times now, but my dad has 75 acres of spooky-ass land where most of any of my stories will take place. Anyway, I was driving. I had just started down the long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. Not cool, but it happens more often than you would believe. I'm nearing the highway when I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Oh well, probably a deer. I shake it off. We have tons of wildlife in the area, from deer to panthers to the occasional bear. And then it starts chasing me. Keep in mind, please, that this shit is practically normal in my mind. I have tons of weird stuff that happens, and it's not like it was just barreling at me. It just moved after my car, staying at the edge of the woods. So, I keep my pace. I turn onto the highway, and I speed up to about 50 or so. But I keep noticing something in my peripheral, so I slow down and start looking for what it could be. A few yards behind me, I see this huge dog. I grew up with larger dogs. My aunt had a St. Bernard mix growing up, and I've had various other large dogs. This thing was literally the size of my car. I know I mentioned bears before, but bears don't chase cars, and we only ever have black bears, which are like the most docile kind unless threatened, or they have their young around. Okay, so now I'm freaking out. I gun it, releasing a long stream of curses and telling my car to get over it. It was a poorly kept 95 Honda Accord, and I had tons of trouble with it dying on me. So any time I had to push it, I made sure to speak kindly to it, since I didn't care at this point. I was simply trying not to die. I seemingly can't shake it for too long, so in an act of bravery and real stupidity, I pull over in a church parking lot, thinking maybe it's some sort of hell beast and it won't come into the light or onto church land. Holy shit, was I wrong. I stop and get my phone out to call my boyfriend. In that span of time, it catches up and jumps onto my car. I can see and feel and hear the metal popping and creaking, and I see drool splatter onto my windshield. I scream, dropping my phone. It jumps off my car onto the hood, where I get a glimpse of it before it goes into the cemetery and disappears. It was definitely a dog, built like a Rottweiler pit mix, but darker and larger. It was solid black, with paws the size of dinner plates. It had a huge head, almost the size of my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm thankful. I called my boyfriend, hysterically crying. He calmed me down and listened, and told me that when I got home I should take pictures. And I did, or tried to at least. By the time I got to my mom's, the only thing left was a single dent in the roof of my car, and some faint claw marks that were more like indentations in the metal. Sorry guys, I don't have the pictures anymore. So I guess, if anything, it was either a Hellhound or a Dogman. You decide. I used to live in Eugene, Oregon, and about 6 years ago, my friend and I saw something unexplainable. We were driving down a country road to a friend's house when I saw something in the middle of the road. It at first appeared to be a large dog. Having grown up with mastiffs, I became worried about the animal. As we got closer, I began to feel a chill down my spine and an uneasiness as it was dusk, but I did not have my car lights on, but could see the animal clearly still. It was the height of a deer with a curved spine and long, thin legs. When it moved, it appears as if the animal's bones were broken, and the movements were so unnatural, but the animal made no cries of pain or appeared to be hurt. The animal had black fur that looked like the worst mange I have ever seen. The naked patches of skin looked wrong, and the bones pushed out from under it. The animal finally turned to look at my car. It had a long nose and was drooling from its open mouth, where there appeared to be large canines. We didn't speak because as it turned to look at us, its eyes were glowing red. I know, it sounds like bullshit from a fake ghost story, but I promise you, this is what they were. This is what I saw. My headlights were not on to illuminate the animal's eyes like that. It crossed slowly in front of my car, and as it disappeared over the side, my passenger yelled to pull up and see what the hell that was. As I pulled up, the animal was gone, and there was only a small drainage pipe and an open field beyond that. We got to our friend's house, and after some prying to him and his parents what we had seen, his father simply chucked and said, "Oh, we see those out here sometimes," and continued to eat dinner. Has anyone else seen something similar to this at close range? If my passenger hadn't been there, I would have thought my imagination got the best of me. I am lucky to know that what I saw was real, and in my opinion, unexplainable. Could it have been a skinwalker? I have no idea. In a small town, rural Tennessee, kids played outside until there was no light to be seen by, and even then, they found ways to stay out until they were brought inside by threat of punishment. I was no exception. One Saturday evening, when I was 2 months into turning 12, as I was coming inside from playing, I was stopped in my tracks by a strange sound, a mix of yipping, growling, and into a barking growl. Coming from an easy 30 or so yards, I was intrigued. I stood on the front porch, looking into the tree line their house faced, trying to find the source of the sound. I expected a dog to emerge, as people were always dumping their dogs in the country, and it was rare that these animals ever found homes. Most of them just roamed the woods. Sitting down on the porch steps, I waited for what I thought would be one of these dogs, but nothing. After a solid 10 minutes, and a loss of more of the dwindling light, I stood to go inside. The sound came again, this time though, deeper and much more guttural. It chilled me. This sound. Looking out into the trees, I saw a very tall figure move in between. It was taller than the fence outlining the trees, and those are a good 4 to 5 feet. I took hold of the door. The sound came again, and it felt it go right through me. It's difficult to explain. I felt as if it rooted me to the spot. I opened the door and moved to step inside. My eyes were locked on the spot where this thing had moved toward the fence. I saw a slice of what looked like a shadow coming to life, and put a hand on the fence. I didn't wait for more. I stepped inside the house and closed the door after me. I've never spoken of this to any other person before now. Although I've never doubted what I saw, I never had a name for it. I saw no real features other than a vague outline, but what prompted me to share this were the details of that outline. It had arms of impossible length, and 2 ears on the side of its head that were long and slender. Its upper torso was broad along the shoulders and tapered down. I could not see the legs for the fence, nor the feet. I never heard the term Dogman until a month or so ago, and I haven't been in 12 for several long years now, but I know that's what I saw out in the tree line. What else could it have been?